Welcome to the Friday, October 26th edition of the Clemson Dubcast. Florida State week. Clemson getting ready for the something less than showdown tomorrow at Doak Campbell. Noon game. Amazing how much things have changed in recent years. Seems like just yesterday we were writing about this being the new Alabama LSU monumental annual showdown. The last 4 years combined, Florida State has dragged an 18-11 combined record into this game. Clemson, on the other hand, 30-1 is the Tigers' record entering this game. Amazing. Just no other word for it, because you look at not only the recruiting rankings, which Dabo Swinney referenced earlier this week, saying he's 1-9 against Florida State in the recruiting rankings during his time, but you turn on the games and you watch this year's Florida State team and you see talent, plenty of it. Just goes to show you how important offensive line is. And the quarterback position. We are going to delve a lot more into that when we talk with Corey Clark of Warchant.com, our rival sister site. Really fun conversation with him. Great guy, and I think you'll really enjoy this podcast with him coming up. Title sponsor of the Clemson Dubcast, Parham Smith and Archenhold Law Firm in Greenville. Very happy to have them aboard. Couldn't do it without them. Blake Smith and Brooke Archenhold, both Clemson grads, both huge fans. Forte of their firm is medical negligence. They represent patients and their family members in medical negligence actions. They also handle all sorts of other complex personal injury litigation. I can vouch for them. About 10 years ago, a family member had a pretty serious medical situation with one of the local hospitals. Went to Blake Smith, and he very quickly and authoritatively gave us some great advice, and we were very thankful for that. Parham Smith and Archenhold offers free consultations. Give them a call, 864-990-4581, or parhamlaw.com. Also sponsoring the podcast is the Abernathy Boutique Hotel, right down about a block or two from the stadium. Great location. All the ESPN folks who are in Clemson at various points throughout the year, they stay there and they absolutely love it, just because it's so convenient, so nice, with all sorts of amenities, including the Taps Bar and Cafe. They also have a tailgate outside before home games and grilling out hot dogs, hamburgers, got a DJ, got multiple bars outside. They're partnering with Jack Daniels for those events. So a lot of cool stuff over at the Abernathy. Got a lot of good beers on tap inside at Taps Bar and Cafe. My favorite is the Hugie Street IPA. So go on over there and give them a look. Check them out. Right across from Lower Lot 2 or on the internets at theabernathy.com. Okay, Corey Clark of Warchant.com on the wreckage that is Florida State football. Also, his great appreciation and admiration for Dabo Swinney and how he has built a monster in the foothills and much, much more. Hope y'all enjoy. All right, here we are with Corey Clark. Are you a senior writer too?
I am, buddy. Us senior writers got to stick together.
So funny. I was doing a podcast with you yesterday. Yesterday being Wednesday. We're recording this on a Thursday evening, and your sidekick called me the founder and publisher of Tiger Illustrated, so I had to correct him really quickly.
You should have just gone with it, man. You should have just gone with it. And you're like, yeah, if I had a vision from the time I was in college.
Well, if my boss didn't listen to
right,
podcasts, maybe I would have. Okay, so you Similar to me, spent a long time in newspapers and made the shift over to Rivals with Warchant.com. When did this happen?
This happened in December of 2017. So actually, the last story I wrote for the Tallahassee Democrat, and I worked there for 10 years, and I was a columnist for the last half of that time. The last column I wrote for the Democrat was the Willie Taggart introductory press conference.
Okay.
So I felt like, okay, this is a good time. It kind of worked out perfectly, starting new, starting fresh somewhere else with I kind of wrote out with Jimbo with the Democrat, and Lord knows I had plenty to write about last fall with that debacle, and then right into Warchant in middle of December. So my first game was in lovely Shreveport.
Wow. Okay, I know what the decision was like for me to leave newspapers back in 2008. A good decision, but still a wrenching decision just because I'm a newspaper guy at heart. I assume you're the same way, but I want to hear it. I want to hear your story. And
yeah, it was hard. I worked in newspapers for 20 years, started in Thomasville, Georgia, then went to Valdosta, then at Gwinnett Daily Post. So I worked in mainly high schools, and I really appreciate the value of newspapers. I understand the value of newspapers. I love newspapers. And, the thing about the Democrat was, I have an odd situation. My son lives in Atlanta, which is where I am now talking to you in Beaufort, Georgia. Actually about 20 minutes away from where one Deshaun Watson went to school and is from. So my son lives up here. So half the time I'm up here and half the time I'm in Tallahassee. And the Democrat was so kind to me because I can't imagine another paper of the Democrat size allowing its sports columnists to live in another city half the time. But they allowed me to do it and still cover everything I need to cover for Florida State. And they were they went above and beyond to accommodate me. And so that was the hardest decision, was kind of letting them down. I know where the industry's going. It's been heading this way well since before you made the move. Newspapers aren't in a good way. They are slowly dying around the country. I think there will always be a Tallahassee Democrat, but I don't know in what capacity. And I just thought for my future, I just thought this was the best. I still got the same situation where I can be up here half the time and in Tallahassee half the time. And I just thought for my personal situation and for my career, it was the better move to go to to an online website, because I don't think the interest in Warchant and in Florida State football is going to wane. But I do think newspapers are not even slowly. They're just not in a good way right now, especially ones that are owned by major corporations like the Democrat is.
So how did that work? Did you just obviously you knew Gene Williams and Ira Scheffel. I'm pronouncing that correctly?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. He left the Democrat several years ago to go to Warchant. Did you just call him up and say, "Hey, if you're interested in talking, maybe we can get something done," or how did that work?
Well, no, Gene. So when Ira left in 2014, Gene kind of made a run at me too. And I just, in that moment, because the Democrat was, number one, I like being a columnist for a newspaper. I mean, that's pretty awesome. I mean, the people in the community know you. I get stopped a lot. It's really cool. I mean, just selfishly, if I'm walking around somewhere with my son and somebody comes up and says, "Oh, I love reading you in the newspaper." I mean, it's a cool feeling. It's a neat feeling. And I liked being the voice of a paper. And so they came to me. Ira left in like July of 2014. So right after the off season after the national championship, he left to go to Warchant. We were at the Democrat together. I did not. I'll be honest. I wasn't a big fan of him doing that. I understood why he was doing it, but at the same time, I tried to talk him out of it repeatedly. And then weirdly, like at the end of when he realized that he was leaving, he and Gene then started talking to me about making the move. Like we would be a package deal. These tandem recruits that, the 5-star and the 3-star, like, yeah, you can have me, but you got to get my buddy that's a long snapper. So it felt like that a little bit. And I'll be honest, I came kind of close back in 2014. But then they were willing to let me to do what I was going to do as far as go back and forth. And they were so nice to me. They hired me. I'd been there for 7 years. I wanted to be loyal. So I stayed for the next, I guess, 4 football seasons and was the columnist. But so like maybe around, I want to say October of last year, October, November, a person left Warchant, and Gene reached out through Ira to see if I would be interested. And I was just in a different place. I'd been 4 years in that job, and I could kind of see. I just was, I'm just worried about newspapers. Again, I think the Democrat will always be there in some capacity or another, but they are so much. Newspapers now are so worried about online. That's all they care about, to the point where like the actual print product is a third of the size that it used to be when I started there. It's more expensive than it's ever been. The ad rates are going. I mean, there's nothing really. They don't care about the print product, and I'm like, well, if I'm working in a newspaper that doesn't really care about the print product, why wouldn't? And all they care about really is online and video. Why wouldn't I go do online and video for an entity that I really have a lot of confidence in, because Gene's been doing it for 20 years now, and work with my buddy, my friend, for the last 20 years, and so it just seemed like the perfect time to do it. But it was hard, man. It was wrenching to tell the people that had been so good to you that you were taking another job, and there was really no amount of money, and that's the truth. I mean, not that they could have offered me seven figures, but there was no really amount of money that was going to get me to change my mind. Quite to not get too personal, but when my dad passed away in 2011, I was lucky enough to have a dad that made some money, and so I'm kind of taken care of financially either way. So it wasn't really a money issue. It was a lifestyle issue, just a personal issue. Like it wasn't, they couldn't offer me enough money to not want to try this new avenue out. So that's what I did. But it wasn't easy to tell people that were so good to you, like Jim Henry, who was my boss, the sports editor. It wasn't easy to tell them that I was moving on and kind of moving to a competitor.
I know that the coolest part for me upon making the move was instantly being a part of this community of subscribers, people who were, your customers, but who also you sort of have a direct relationship with in a positive way, and also in a constructive way, in that when you mess up, you're going to hear about it. You don't really have that with newspapers. What about your experience? What's been the coolest part to you about it? And also, has there been a part of it that maybe you didn't expect going in, that you sort of had to experience by going through it?
What's weird about it is that, like, I realized, because, a message board, a football message board, Warchant, no matter what you write, there's going to be people, even if it's completely over the top, effusive in praise of anything. There's going to be a few people that comment and say, I didn't like this. What are we doing? Or come out and say, is this what I'm paying for? That kind of stuff. And I'm not great at that. I'm not great at handling the criticism. Not that I can't take constructive criticism. And it's not that it hurts my feelings. It's that I want to respond and say, no, this is what I meant. Uh-huh. This is what I meant. You didn't understand my point. This is what I was trying to say. And it's just not healthy so when I write something, when I write a column and post a link on Twitter, and this happened back when I was the Democrat too, I just wouldn't read my notifications, because I know how my brain works. Like, there'll be 40 people that say, man, this was great. You nailed it. Good job. There'll be 4 people that said, this is just laughable. This is just the stupidest thing I've ever read. And those are the people that I engage. And I'm like, what is that about my brain that I won't just say thank you to the people that are nice to me, but I have to argue with the people that are mean to me? And so I've been doing this now for about 10 months on Warchant. And quite frankly, that's something I've got to get better at. I've got to get better about going into one of my posts and reading the reactions, and then communicating in a way I'm not defensive, that I can have a conversation without, hurting feelings or getting my feelings hurt, and just being able to, you just go with the flow a little bit. I've still got to get better about that, because that's the one thing that at the Democrat, you didn't get nearly as much of instantaneous feedback that you do when you're on a message board and when you're on a rival site. And that's what I've still got to get better at. I've got to engage a little more than I have been so far. Now, I still post a good bit, but I'm not on there every second of every day following the tribal council and seeing what people are talking about. Plus, it's one thing when you're covering a team that's 7-0 and number 2 in the country. Mm-hmm. When you start out 1-2 and you've scored 10 points in your first 2 ACC games and you barely beat Samford, well, it's not a great, fun place to be around. So, that's another thing I got to just get a little bit better at. Just bite the bullet, go in there and interact.
So how long of a trip is that from where you are? 5.5 hours or so?
Yeah, 5 hours. And I usually do it. I try to do it at night. So I'll leave Tallahassee around 6 so I don't have to get stuck in any Atlanta traffic.
And you're doing that at least once a week?
Yeah. So my schedule is I'll be in Tallahassee. Typically we get Willie on Monday. We get defensive players on Tuesday, and our offensive players on Tuesday and coordinator, and then defensive players and coordinator on Wednesday. So usually I will leave either Tuesday night after I get done with that, so like 7, and then I'll come back. So I'll miss one of the interview days, and then I come back on Friday to Tallahassee. So I'm up here really Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night. Drive back down Friday afternoon for the game, and I'm in Tallahassee for 4 days, up here for 3 days. And I've been doing that now, Larry, this is my 4th year doing it, my 5th year doing it.
And you'll do all the football road games and some of the basketball road games as well, is that right?
Correct. The only road games I'll do in basketball now, just because, the deal, just you're at a Clemson site or a Florida State site, people want them to be good, but it doesn't get huge traffic. At least our basketball stories don't get huge traffic, even unless they're in the Elite 8. So I will go to Clemson because I'm close. I'll go to Georgia Tech because I'm close. My house is actually, even though I call myself living in Atlanta, I'm actually closer. It takes me longer to get to Georgia Tech than it does to Clemson from where I live. So I'll go to those 2 road games if they're playing there. And yeah, that's about it. And then I didn't go to Syracuse, and I'm not going to Notre Dame. But I'm going to all the other road games. We'll have 3 other people at Notre Dame, and I don't love flying, so they let me have the road trips where I don't have to fly.
All right, we were talking about this yesterday on your podcast back in 2013 when Florida State came to Death Valley and did it big, in the words of Jameis Winston. When everybody walked out of that stadium, you're not thinking, okay, over the next 5 years, Clemson is going to take a stranglehold on everybody, including Florida State, and then Florida State is going to just gradually slip from the top of the mountain and then tumble down to where they're at the point you were just describing, where they can barely move the football against Syracuse. What in the world happened?
Yeah, the people are still trying to figure that out. It was a precipitous fall. We look at that. The 2013 team is one of the best teams I've ever seen. Obviously it's the best team I've ever covered. It's one of the best teams in college football history. If you look at the lineup, the whole starting 11 on each side is in the NFL or played in the NFL. It's just a remarkable collection of talent. And something happened. The off the field stuff with Jameis obviously didn't help, and Clemson really was like the last week of like the innocent Jameis. And I don't mean innocent as in like innocent or guilty. I just mean like everybody was in love with him. Sports Illustrated was writing stories on him. They were broadcasting his weekly press conferences. He was the guy. And then obviously the news came out, I think a week and a half after the Clemson game, and it was soiled a little bit. It just wasn't, and it went, I think it started then, although that team was so good that it didn't matter. And then 2014, if you remember that season, they still won every game, but they almost lost like 7 times. They had the miracle out. They were down 21-3 to Louisville. They were down 16-0 to Miami. They played Clemson with McGuire at quarterback because Jameis was a dummy in the student union. They 4 or 5 different times they beat Boston College on a last-second field goal. They were down 16-7 to a bad Florida team. They almost lost every game, or could have lost every game. And I don't know what happened. Like, what makes Dabo and Nick Saban so unique is that their teams are always play hard. And they always play. They just seem. I know they'll have a slip up every season, 1 or 2, where it's close in the fourth quarter. But whatever reason, I think Jimbo's message was lost in the locker room. Those guys in 2000, that's when the slide started. That team should have been beating teams by 30 and 40 points, and they were barely sneaking by. They were doing just enough. And not again to get personal, I kind of go, I'm having an issue like that with my son right now. He's just a smart kid. He's a really smart kid, but he barely gets by in the class. He's 10, and he's barely getting A's and B's, and he got a C. And it's like, man, you're doing the bare minimum to get by. And I'm trying to stop that now. So by the time he gets to high school, he's a different kid that knows how to study and takes pride in himself. And for whatever reason, that football team didn't have a lot of pride in itself to go dominate teams and to go play. No, don't care who the opponent is, just go play well. And I think, so it started in 14, they get rolled by Oregon. And then in 15, he brings in Golson because he really struggled in the quarterback department recruiting, which when you go back to it is probably the biggest mystery of the downfall of Florida State is you would have thought after Christian Ponder, well, for Jimbo, he went from Jamarcus Russell to Christian Ponder to E.J. Manuel to Jameis Winston. So that's 4 first-round picks, 2 who were the number 1 overall pick in the draft out of 4 quarterbacks. Where did the quarterbacks go? Like, you would have thought every quarterback in the country, he would have had his pick of any quarterback in the country to come play for him. And in 2015, because Coker left, and Coker wasn't all that great anyway, because Coker left, he had to get Everett Golson to be a starter. And then the year after that, it's a redshirt freshman, DeAndre Francois, who's good but not great. Like, why is it Trevor Lawrence at Florida State? Why was it Justin Fields at Florida State? And for whatever reason, he had Malik Henry, who I don't know if you remember the name.
Oh, yeah.
But, yeah, he was a big-time quarterback that committed as a junior and was just it was an awful fit from the beginning. Anybody that followed Malik Henry's high school career had to know that wasn't going to work out. That was a dumb risk to take. That kid can't even get on the field at a junior college now and couldn't last year, barely played last year, there was no way that was going to work out. He was a problem child. He was not going to play for Jimbo, but Jimbo put all his eggs in that basket, and they tipped over. And he was left with what he's been left with. Last year, you lose your starting quarterback the first game of the season, and you're left with a true freshman? Like, that's your backup? But what happened? Why was J.J. Cosentino on the team? That kid was a redshirt junior, and he couldn't beat out a true freshman. Well, what was he even doing on the team? Like, Jimbo's good at evaluating quarterbacks. He's great at developing and coaching them, but for whatever reason, they stopped coming to Florida. The big-time guys stopped coming. So that was number one. And I think go ahead. I'm sorry.
Let me interrupt you. Also, John Franklin. The head case who's on Last Chance U, DeAndre Johnson, was that his last name? Who punched
they had literally Florida State 3 years in a row on Last Chance U had the starting quarterback. So if you want to go to where it kind of went wrong, there's your message. Now, DeAndre Johnson, by all accounts, that guy had a sterling reputation coming out of high school, and he made a dumb, awful mistake that rightly cost him his scholarship at Florida State. I don't really pin that one on Jimbo as much as the other two. But, yeah, literally 3 years in a row, the first 3 years of Last Chance U were centered around former Florida State quarterbacks. Well, if you want to know where it went wrong, there's a good explanation for it. And then, also you just, losing that he didn't make good hires at defensive coordinator after Pruitt left. I don't think Charles Kelly was very good at all, quite frankly. Certainly Florida State could have done better. His offensive line recruiting has been an abomination now for years. He was too loyal to Rick Trickett, in my opinion, and should have rectified that years ago and didn't. They actually, I'm sure Clemson fans don't really realize this, but that 2013 offensive line was really good, right? I mean, it was littered with NFL linemen. Well, the center was Brian Stork, who came in as a tight end. The best lineman on the team was Cameron Irving, who came in as a defensive tackle. And another lineman was a kid named Trey Jackson, who played in the league, who Florida State didn't even offer till the week before signing day. He was committed to Georgia Tech. So they lucked into 3 guys that Rick Trickett didn't recruit. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't like they pegged these guys when they were sophomores or juniors and said, that's going to be my starting offensive line in 2012 and 2013. They lucked into that group. The guys they've actually brought in, tried to develop, evaluated, have largely just been huge disappointments, literally and figuratively. And now it's to a point where I mean, it's kind of almost a laughing stock of college football how bad the offensive line is at Florida State. And I think that directly goes back to Rick Trickett and his coaching style. I don't think there's a lot of people that just don't want to play for a coach like that. He is the epitome of a hard ass. He is not fun to play for. I'm sure his players appreciate it after they're done, but while they're there, it's just not fun. And so I think you limit the pool you're fishing from. When you have a coach like they don't get 5-star first round, they don't get offensive linemen, they don't recruit 5-star offensive linemen. They just don't get them. There's only so many guys that are interested in being coached by Rick Trickett, and Rick Trickett would rather have a 2-star or a 3-star kid and mold him into a Rodney Hudson than he would a 5-star, one of the guys that goes to Alabama. That's not his speed. He would rather coach the 2- and 3-star kids. Well, when you're at Florida State, man, that you need to recruit with the big boys, because you recruit the best defensive backs in the country and the best wide receivers and running backs. You should do the same thing at the most important position on the team. And that just, again, there's a long answer, but I think it's the quarterback. I think it's the offensive line. And then something happened with Jimbo where his message got lost, and there was a real sense of entitlement. I know for a fact that last year, it might have been going on for a longer time than that, but last year, and maybe other schools do it, maybe you can enlighten me, but Florida State players had valet parking at the football facility.
What?
Yeah, no, the student managers would go park their cars for them and bring the cars up to them.
Wow. I mean,
you know what I'm saying? Like, that's in their, they were the second worst Power 5 team in the country when it came to GPA. It's stuff like that, right? Like, people might hear this and go, all right, whatever, fine. They're football players, but it's that kind of stuff off the field. If you let that stuff go, if you're okay with your team being one of the worst performing academic teams in the entire country, what else are you letting go behind the scenes? Where's the accountability? Where's the keeping them from being entitled? And it just, all those guys, man, they recruited kids that came into, the kids that won the 2013 national championship. They were hungry, man. You had Joiners and Telvin Smiths and Timmy Jernigans. They hadn't proven anything. They were hungry. The guys that came after that, I think they started recruiting kids that just expected to be in the league in 3 years. If we win, okay, whatever. I know I'm going to the league. And it was a perfect storm of a lot of different factors. But that entitlement and that, unaccountability, to make up a word, I think that's what really caught up with them these last few years.
The culture, yeah.
Was that the longest answer you've ever gotten?
Oh, that's great.
It had to have been.
No, it's fantastic. I've given some long ones myself over the years.
But you're right. That's the word, culture.
Yeah,
the culture was great. And when those guys, in 2014, it flipped. The culture just, for whatever reason, the pride kind of lessened. Because remember that 2013 team, man, the week after Clemson, when everybody thought there'd be a letdown because it was the biggest win in a decade in Florida State, at least, they were up 35-0 in the first quarter against NC State. Like, they were their own barometer. They didn't take it lightly just because they were favored. But I mean, they were up 35-0 in a quarter after the biggest win. You would have thought they could have gone through the motions and been up 24-8 at halftime or something. No, man, they put that thing away in 15 minutes. And somewhere along the way, when those guys left, the leadership left with them, and the culture wasn't nearly as strong as I thought it was after that season. I thought he was going to build another Alabama. And it turns out the guy in Clemson came as close as anybody else to building another Alabama.
What did you think of Dabo 4, 5, 6 years ago?
I thought he was a goofball. I thought he was a goofball he was lovable. And I understood why his players like playing for him. But, I'll be honest with you. There was that scene before that 2013 game where they get off the bus. I mean, it was great television. I mean, I know they do that every game, but just the way ABC built that thing up was incredible. He gets off the bus. He's slapping fives with all the fans on the hill. Meanwhile, they cut to Jimbo, who's in the tunnel looking at his play sheet, kind of nodding his head while his players are around him. I'm like, well, there's the difference, man. One guy's a goofball that's just wanting to hang out, just slap fives with the fans. And there's the guy that takes it seriously, that's looking at his play sheet and getting ready to kick some ass. And I couldn't have been more wrong. Like that night, sure, I was right, but things didn't go Clemson's way, and that was an all-time great Florida State team. But, man, it just led me to believe that there aren't many Nick Sabans, man. You can't – I now Dabo is the guy that I hope Willie Taggart is. Like, he's fun. He's engaging. He's opinionated. He seems – over the top genuine, like just straight up a genuine guy. And I don't know if he's a great X's and O's guy. Well, guess what? Bobby Bowden wasn't an incredible X's and O's guy, but he got good assistants. He delegated and he built a culture that was sustainable. And that's what Dabo has done. So I put way too much stock in to kind of his, what I perceived as goofiness. And, they just stacked him with these great coordinators. Yeah. Good luck when Chad Morris leaves. Good luck, buddy. Good luck when Taj Boyd and Sammy Watkins leave, man. Sure, you're a good recruiter, but you can't sustain yourself. Well, man, obviously I couldn't have been more wrong. And now I talk about it all the time. I hope that instead of all the Sabanites that we get, the Jimbos, the Kirbys, whoever else, I hope we start getting more Dabos, man. College football should be fun. It shouldn't be this serious. It shouldn't be just joyless, soulless murder ball, as Mark Ennis calls Alabama, the radio host in Louisville. It shouldn't be that. It should be fun. We should have personalities. Dabo's a personality, and he enjoys winning, and he enjoys his players. And as I've seen the anti-Dabo, who, kicked his ass a couple of times, I got it, and won a national championship. But I saw how quickly that culture deteriorated, like almost overnight. To what Dabo sustained, I'm like, well, man, maybe that's how you run a program. I'm really happy that Dabo is doing what he's doing, and that's genuine because Willie Taggart has a lot of those same qualities. Now, he doesn't have the wins yet, but, Dabo didn't have the wins his first few years. But I hope coaches can go back to not taking themselves too seriously, having fun, being fans of other sports, being a part of the family and not just a mercenary, loving what he does. All that comes off in Dabo from the outside. And Willie's kind of have a lot of those similar qualities, and that's what I hope starts to permeate college football more. I don't want 25 Nick Sabans running around, man, or Sabanites. That's not fun to me. That not getting to talk to who you want to talk to. Everybody's off limits. I'm tired of this question. I'm not asking all that stuff, man. Just you can be a good person and still be a good football coach. And that's what Dabo, I think, has proven, obviously. And everybody down in Tallahassee certainly wants Willie Taggart to prove that as well.
Now, you grew up going to Florida State games, right?
I did, yeah. I grew up in Atlanta, but my dad was a Florida State alum. So I started going to games in like maybe 84, 85.
Wow, what a great time to start going to Florida State games.
I was at the Punt Rooski.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Business owners out there, if you own a business that accepts credit cards, you need to listen up. Tandem Payment, based right here in the upstate, run by Clemson folks, is changing the face of payment processing, quickly becoming the most cost-effective solution for all small businesses. Tandem's program saves you up to 90% on processing charges and gives your customers what they love most, choices. This is not some crazy introductory offer. Tandem's technology allows business owners to offset their credit card processing costs by applying a small customer service charge to each sale they make. If you want to know more, visit tandempayment.com today. Former Tiger Hot Rod McDowell works over there at Tandem Payment. They handle all their business and customer service face-to-face. So give them a call, 864-672-1570. If you're tired of spending an arm and a leg on all those credit card processing fees. We had Andy Staples on the podcast recently, and I tried this theory out on him, and he agreed, and now I want to try it out on you, given your institutional knowledge of Florida State and Bobby Bowden. And I can't help but think back to that after that Punt Rooski game when Bobby was in the press conference in his rain suit, physically demonstrating the Punt Rooski play, like how it went down, to all the reporters. Dabo is the modern version of Bobby Bowden. Agree or disagree?
I do. Yes, I do. I do agree with that. From his faith, He's not shy about it, which whether you agree or disagree, he is who he is, man. And he makes no bones about it. And especially in this day and age for him to be like that, I appreciate it. I do that he is who he is. I think the one difference was the one difference I would say in their ascents to where they got was, Bowden was an offensive innovator in the late 70s and early 80s. He did call the plays for a lot of time. And I said he wasn't a great X's and O's guy. Well, I meant more like in the 90s when the dynasty was going and Mark Richt and Brad Scott and those people were calling plays. But when he was building Florida State, he was like just an innovator. He ran trick plays all the time. But as far as personalities, yeah, right? I think I should ask you, players must love Dabo, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think Bobby had some of that too back then when he was, he might have been 60 something when Florida State actually started the dynasty or close to it. So he was older than Dabo when he reached his mountaintop. But players back when Bobby was first building Florida State in the late 70s loved playing for him. They'd never been around anybody like him. He was fun. He was funny. But he was also a competitor, man. And I know Dabo's got that in him too. Like Dabo's just not slapping fives and slapping butts if they're losing and oh, well, we'll get him next time. I mean, he's a competitor. All the great coaches are. But yeah, what I like about Dabo too is like, it seems sustainable. And it seems like I know the chatter that's going to come if Nick ever retires, please God retire. But when Saban retires, I know the chatter is going to come about him leaving to go back home. But man, what a mistake that would be, because he has built something there, and that's a special place, man. I've been to Clemson enough to know it's a special fan base. It really is. And maybe I shouldn't be saying that as somebody that writes for Warchant, but I get it. Like I said, I've been going to games up there for 30 years. It's a special place. Even when they're bad, that place is rocking. At least when they played Florida State. So I hope that Dabo looks at Bobby Bowden and says, that's who I want to be. Like, I want to be at a place for 30 years or 40 years. I want to retire at Clemson. I want them to build statues of me. Do they have a statue of Dabo yet?
Not yet, but they could get away with putting one up.
They'll have one. They'll put one up soon enough. But I hope he does that. I hope he wants to stay at Clemson and retire there. But, yeah, I certainly think personality-wise, faith-wise, culture-wise, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself because it's been what now, 6 years, 7 years that he's had this thing really humming. So he's kind of halfway to what the dynasty that Bowden had, but he seems to be well on his way. It doesn't look like it's slowing down. And I certainly think he could have a career, at least national championship wise, conference championship wise, that comes close to Bowden. Sure. And again, I think he's a likable dude, and there's nobody that was more likable in college football than Bobby Bowden.
Florida State from 87 to 2000 had that incredible run, one of the most remarkable runs in college football history, 14 straight years in the top 5. That's right.
Yeah, 14 in the top 5, yeah.
Nobody in the late 90s when, Florida State's beaten Virginia Tech for the BCS title in 99. Nobody's sitting there thinking that that they're gonna decline, but they did. Is it pretty much accepted that once Bowden lost Mark Richt and Chuck Amato, was that the sort of trigger of them sort of slipping?
Yeah, and it wasn't just that that they lost Mark Richt; it's who they replaced them with. I was actually talking about this today on my podcast that Jeff Bowden is who he replaced him with.
Wow. And
that was it was just, you think about what Florida State's program was at that time. They had just lost Oklahoma in the national championship game, but that was their 5th championship game, I think, in 6 years, maybe 6th and 8. They had, just like you said, 14 top 5 finishes. They had an incredible recruiting class that year. And I legitimately think he could have gotten head coaches from smaller schools to come be his offensive coordinator. He could have gotten NFL offensive coordinators to come be his offensive coordinator, because they would have thought rightly, okay, I can go in there for a few years and then maybe I got a chance to be the head coach at Florida State. Like, that could have been the carrot they dangled. And he went and hired his son. and it imploded. And, Jeff, Aslan, the guy that I host the show with, asked me if he thought Jeff Bowden had ever been back inside Doak Campbell Stadium since they lost 30-0. And I'm like, no, probably not. And I said, it's kind of sad. I mean, Jeff Bowden was a wide receivers coach. He had won 2 national championships at Florida State, but he is the direct cause in Florida State fans' mind for the lost decade, for the debacle that became the 2000s. And it's really not his fault. It's his dad's fault. Like, you could have hired anyone in the country, and you hired your son. And then when it was obvious that he was in over his head, you wouldn't fire him or demote him. And so that's where, that's kind of where it got ugly there at the end, obviously, with Bowden, is when he had to, he would not fire his son. So they essentially had to fire him and force him to resign and give him a buyout and all that. But yeah, that was when it went wrong, was Jeff Bowden, who just was not capable. And it went, 2001, they lost 5 games, 2004, 4 games, 2003, 3 games, 2004, 4 games. This was, and again, 2005, 5 or 6 games. This was a program that was used to losing 1 game a year. And then the next 5 years, they lost like 20. And averaged 4.5 losses a season. And that was directly related to the guy that was the offensive coordinator, because Mickey was still there. Mickey was still producing elite talent. But the other side of the ball, with Chris Ricks at the helm, being guided by Jeff Bowden, it was just it was a debacle, and it got ugly really quickly.
And you probably don't know this, but the 2003 Florida State team indirectly responsible for an assistant named Dabo Swinney remaining at Clemson.
Because they were all going to get fired, right?
Correct. Dabo he had been there. He had been here less than a year. He had of course, the 2-year career in commercial real estate. After getting fired at Alabama, he comes and joins Tommy in March of 2003, I want to say. And then they get drilled at Wake Forest, 45-17. The game wasn't even that close. The week before, number 3 Florida State comes to town. Clemson administrators believe that they might have pulled the trigger. Had Florida State won that game as expected, they were a 17-point favorite, by the way. That's kind of
right, there you go.
An ironic twist.
15 years later.
If Clemson doesn't pull off the mother of all upsets, 26-10, and then goes on, of course, to win a bunch of games, or 4 straight games in a dominating fashion, there's no way Dabo is retained by the next coach, because he hadn't had a chance to really make his mark. And if you think about it, just from Dabo's perspective, okay, think about your resume at that point. If Clemson doesn't win that game, if Bowden's staff gets fired, your resume reads: receivers coach under Mike DeBose, fired. Not retained by Dennis Franchione. Receivers coach for less than a year under Tommy Bowden, fired, and not retained by the next coach. What happens to him if that game goes the other way? Like, not just not becoming the Clemson head coach 5 years later and becoming one of the greatest coaches in college football beyond that, but heck, maybe he goes back into commercial real estate.
I was going to say, first off, what kind of realtor he was. I mean, he's a guy that obviously is very good at convincing people to do things. He was very persuasive. Was he good?
He was really good. And in fact, he took a pay cut, a massive pay cut, to get back into college football. So
so I think he always had that. But I think with Dabo, man, now I can say this in hindsight. Obviously, it's easy. I think anytime he would have met with a head coach or an AD trying to get a wide receiver's job, it would have worked out. Like, they would have been, all right, we want that on the staff. We want that energy on our staff. He obviously can recruit. The players are going to like playing for him. That's somebody that you would hope, that people would see those kind of character traits in and hire him. But yeah, man, certainly there are Florida State fans at the time, I know, who thought, oh, did the dad just throw that game?
Clemson fans thought the same thing.
Just throw the game so the son could stick around and keep his job? Because that was a really well-timed upset. Like, he knew it too. Bobby knew it too. Now, I certainly don't think he would have done that, but I also don't think he was completely, let's say, despondent that they lost that game.
So you mentioned that 30-0 debacle against Wake Forest. That was 2008, right?
6.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
I was having flashbacks to those Jeff Bowden days in Florida State's game against Virginia Tech earlier
Sure.
this season. Okay, we know they were in shambles at one point this season. We know they have sort of got back on the tracks a little bit. Well, actually, you could say a lot. What's your take on whether they are capable of hanging with Clemson on Saturday?
Yeah, as I mentioned with the offensive line, they can't block those guys. I joked on another show. I'm not pimping my shows or anything, but I just don't want people that have listened to both. I don't want them to think that I'm acting like this is an original thought. But I joked that DeAndre Francois should throw a ball as hard as he can right at the testicles of all 4 defensive linemen. Because they're going to be in his face quickly. And so take turns throwing it as hard, because he throws a good ball, as hard as he can right at their crotches to slow them down, because that legitimately might be the only way that they can move the ball, is if those guys are just, for whatever reason, hesitant about rushing, because they can't block them. They just can't. Like, a good Florida State line would have trouble with these guys. And, remember last year, I know they had the run there with like a 6-minute run where they scored 14 points, but they didn't do anything last year either. Like, they was 17-0 at half. Clemson kind of stumbled around and let them hang in that game, which they shouldn't have. But this offense, if it doesn't have Dalvin Cook, it doesn't do much against Clemson. And so they're not, I can't envision a scenario where they're going to block it up well enough to consistently move the ball and go score even 3 touchdowns. So, maybe there's a pick six, a strip sack, a punt return for a touchdown. That's about the only way I can see Florida State hanging around. I don't think that's a referendum on Willie Taggart. I don't think that means he can't get it done here. I think his offense, the way he wants to run, and he wants to run like he wants, the last 3 years, the last 4 years maybe, the last 3 years, his offenses before this year had finished 12th, 5th, and 11th in the country in rushing offense. Like, well over 260 yards a game rushing. This year they're in the hundreds. Like, they're 118th. They're behind, like, anybody you can think of, Ball State. They can't run the ball. And that's what he wants to do. That's what his whole offense is predicated on. You think up tempo, shotgun, 4 wides that you're a throw it team. No, he doesn't want to do that. But he's forced to do that because they can't run the ball at all. And I just think if you're forced to throw against Clemson, and they do have good wide receivers, and I think they will make some plays in the air, but they're also going to get sacked. He's also going to be pressured into some bad throws, and I think that's where it gets dicey, because if he even just makes 1 or 2 horrible mistakes, an interception in the middle of the field that gets returned deep into Florida State territory, a sack, like the Miami game, they were in control of that game. They should have won that game, but 2 bad plays by the quarterback, because, and the 2 bad plays by the quarterback got Miami back in that game. And then Florida State just could not move the ball the rest of the game. Couldn't run it, couldn't throw it. They got a touchdown taken away on a bad call, but still they managed 45 yards of offense in the second half. Miami's got a good defense. It ain't Clemson's defense. So that's what I just think that's such a mismatch. I think Florida State's defense is pretty good. Not great, but pretty good. And I don't think Clemson will just roll up and down the field for 600 or 700 yards. I could be wrong, but I don't think that'll happen. But the other side of the ball is what concerns you the most, because I can't envision a scenario where Florida State scores enough to have a chance to win this game in the fourth quarter, unless some crazy things happen.
Corey did some numbers last week from in the ACC, in ACC play, including championship games. From 2012 to 2014, Florida State was 26-1. Clemson was 20-4. The next best team was NC State. I'm sorry, I'm getting my math wrong. I'm sorry. Anyway, so that was from 12 to 14. From 15 to 18, Clemson is 29-2, and Florida State is 16-13.
Yeah, and think about 16. They have 16 wins. They haven't beaten many good ACC teams. A few of those were like surviving a last-second pass in the end zone against Wake. They did that last year against Duke. This year they beat Louisville basically because Louisville threw a crazy interception at the end of the game. And I think people want to look at what Willie's doing and say, "Oh man, what in the world?" But it had already started. I think that more than anything, my narrative for this year with Florida State fans, whether it's in my writing or in the shows that I do, is letting them know, man, think about it. Last year they were 3-6 at one point. They were 3-5 in the ACC last year. They got beat by Boston College 35-3. And then their 3 wins were, well, I mean, they beat Wake and Duke. Were 2 of those 3 wins. It was awful. In the year before, I think it was something crazy like they were 14. I think Jimbo ended his tenure at Florida State by being like, I want to say 15-10 in his last 25 against Power 5 opponents. It went so bad that I think we all thought that Willie Taggart's going to come in here and bring new life and bring this fun offense and its chunk plays, and this is going to be fun again real quick. Well, we didn't quite realize how bad the culture had gotten. And how little how bad the offensive line was, yes, but just, none of these guys on this roster have ever done anything in a big game. Francois won an Orange Bowl against Michigan, which I don't want to dismiss that. That was a nice win. But other than that, he hasn't accomplished a whole lot. None of the other guys have accomplished diddly poo. They have to learn how to win again, and they haven't done that yet. And I think it's kind of startling when you put it into those perspectives and not just, okay, they're 1-3 in the ACC this year. Well, it wasn't like they were 21-2 before this year. It had already, I think the plane had already crashed. They're trying to pick up the wreckage now and build a new plane. But I think last year, think about all the recruiting classes Jimbo Fisher's had in the last 5 years, where they rank nationally and in the conference. And they were 3-6 last year. They had to reschedule the Louisiana Monroe game just to get to a bowl. That's how bad the program had gotten, and it wasn't just because their starting quarterback got hurt.
Corey, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Dabo the other day was talking about, hey, I am 1-9 against Florida State in recruiting classes, and I looked at went through the 2 deep yesterday, and added up the stars for each of the players in the 2 deep. Clemson has 10 5-stars, Florida State 5. Florida State 24 4-stars, Clemson 18. Florida State 13 3-stars, Clemson 10. Clemson 6 2-stars, Florida State 2. So that's comparable.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like the talent for, I think, well, the 2 big differences maybe the biggest difference is what's on the offensive line. And I think Florida State, some of these guys were ranked 4-stars coming out. But man, you watch them on Saturday. They ain't. But they got, and quite frankly, I think offensive line has traditionally and will always be the hardest position to gauge for high school kids. It's really hard because they're so much bigger and stronger than the guys they're going up against. It really is hard to kind of determine. And, the special cases, but a lot of them you just don't know. You don't know how they're going to turn out. But yeah, the rosters are comparable. Clemson's better. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But what I also tell people is, people want to look at the last 3 or 4 recruiting classes and be like, okay, Florida State's recruited really, really well. Like they've recruited almost on the level of like Georgia and Alabama and Clemson. And I'm like, okay, sure, that's what the recruiting rankings have told us. But what has the NFL draft told us? They had 29 guys drafted in 3 years, which was a record, and I think it still stands. And I'm sure Alabama or Clemson or somebody will break it soon. But last year, I think the last 3 years they've had 9 guys drafted, 10 guys drafted, and last year they had, I think they had 4 guys that left early. They had Derwin James leave early. Obviously, he was a first-round pick. They had Tavares McFadden leave early. He did not get drafted. They had Jalen Wilkerson leave early. He did not get drafted. They had Auden Tate leave early. He was the 4th to last pick of the entire draft. The talent, like the recruiting rankings are one thing. But I don't know how much elite NFL talent is on this roster and has been on this roster for a while. And I don't know if that means they're not getting developed well or they weren't evaluated properly. Or they're not fulfilling their potential. In the 2014 class, they signed Dalvin Cook, Travis Rudolph, and Ermon Lane. All 3 of those were 5-star kids. Well, I don't know that Ermon Lane plays football anymore. Travis Rudolph, another guy that left early and didn't get drafted. mean, how many kids do they have? Like one or two kids a year that leave early and don't even get drafted. And obviously, Dalvin Cook was really good. But so I think sometimes those recruiting rankings are a little misleading. Obviously, Erman Lane wasn't a 5-star talent, although he was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. But by and large, yeah, I think if you look on paper, I think Florida State is probably, I don't know, maybe the second or third most talented team in the conference. But none of those guys none of those guys know how to win. And that's not a cliche. I mean, I think you have to learn how to do that. Jimbo always pointed to that 2012 team, which you remember that game down in Tallahassee where Clemson got to a big lead and then Florida State kind of ran away at the end. Well, so that year, I don't know if you remember, but Florida State had to go play at Virginia Tech. And if they'd have lost that game on a Thursday night, then Clemson would have won the Atlantic. I think that's how it would have worked. And Rashad Green scored on a late touchdown, like a 50-yard touchdown, to win that game. And that got Florida State into the ACC championship game where they then beat Georgia Tech barely and then went and beat Northern Illinois in the Orange Bowl. And you could look at that season and go, okay, man, whatever. You beat a bad Georgia Tech team to win the ACC, great. It wasn't a great ACC that year. And then you beat Northern Illinois in the Orange Bowl. Yippity-doo. Jimbo points to that season as the most important season he had at Florida State because he's like, man, I promise you, on Monday morning, all he saw around the football offices were kids wearing their ACC championship hats, their ACC championship shirts. And after the Orange Bowl, their Orange Bowl championship shirts or their rings. Those kids had never won anything. They didn't know what it was like to be a champion. And he said that 2013 would have never, ever happened if they hadn't learned how to win and be a champion in 2012. And I think that's what Willie's having to deal with now, man. He's got so many kids on this roster that just don't know how to win big games. And in fact, when the going gets tough, many times in their careers, they've just kind of run away and not played well and not, bowed their necks and played hard and said, no, you're not blowing me out. No, we are. That Syracuse game, there was no life at the end of that game. And I think, but I will give Willie credit. Since then, like you said, it seems like they've found a little something. Now it's not, I don't think it's gonna be enough to beat Clemson or Notre Dame this year, but I do think maybe they found something within themselves after that Syracuse game, and they've been a different type of team, and they have been. They're 4-1 since that game. They really, quite frankly, probably should be 5-0 since that game. They got that touchdown taken away against Miami, and they kind of gave it away there in the second half. But they're playing a lot better. But still, none of these guys have played on this stage like Saturday, although it's a noon nonsense game. They haven't played on a stage like this and played well. So until they do that, I don't know what kind of program this will be, but this is a good chance for them. Even if they don't win, just to play well, I think would be a big step for this program.
How many empty seats are there going to be Saturday?
So they have this Champions Club. Are you familiar with that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so there will be a lot just because of that. So they built, for the people that don't know, there's this Champions Club in the South End Zone or the North End Zone. I don't know. I don't know my directions. It's the end zone where the band plays is what I call it. But they have a Champions Club, which is one of those suites, those luxurious suites. It's a 3-level club level. It's really nice inside. But that's the problem. It's inside. So everybody buys these seats, but they go stand inside to watch the game and drink beer and eat food and all that. So there will be, I think it's 7,000 seats, 6,000 seats, at least 4,000 empty seats in the end zone. And it looks like, oh man, they didn't show up at all. Well, no, they're there. They're just, the seats are bought. They're just inside drinking. I will say, probably 6 or 8. I think a lot of people, even though they know that they're not probably going to win this game, I think a lot of people have been planning this trip all summer, and I think they're still going to come. They're just going to come with the realization, okay, let's see how bad this is. Not, we've got a chance. I really do think if it's close in the fourth quarter, it'll be a hostile atmosphere. But until then, it won't be. It'll be kind of a, you've done it. Those Florida State games in the 90s, they'd go play at NC State. Well, halfway through the game, it seems like there's 35,000 people there, and they're not really that interested. They're still out in the parking lot. Well, by the fourth quarter, if NC State's up, now it's all full, and it's like a real atmosphere. I think that could be the case on Saturday if somehow Florida State's in the game. But it's not going to be like it's been the last, 4 or 5 times Clemson's come to Tallahassee.
Yeah, the Torrey Holt game in 1998. I think that was their second ACC loss, right, in Raleigh?
Yeah, that's right. Where Winky threw 6 interceptions. And the first play of the game, he hits Peter Ward for like an 80-yard touchdown. And you're like, okay, well, let's be another Florida State win. I actually went to a wedding right after that. And I came back and I'm watching the end of I tuned in the end of the game and it's like, what? It was like 23-7 or something. I'm like, what the hell happened? And, they were storming the field and I think NC State students and fans realized at halftime, oh, wait, are we beating Florida State? All right, let's go over there. Let's go get in the stadium. And maybe that would happen in Doak too. I do think they'll be there for this game. It's the Boston College game that you wonder, okay, how many people are going to show up for this one?
Corey, I gave you about 10 minutes yesterday for your podcast. You gave me about 55 for mine.
Oh, my God. Did I really?
I owe you big time. I will be more than...
How long are these things normally?
This is about it. We get talking, man, and time flies. So
okay, I just don't want to feel like, normally this is a 19-minute podcast.
No.
And I just tripled it because I won't shut up.
No, this is standard. This is standard length, so no worries there.
All right. Okay, good. I don't feel too bad then.
Well, listen, thank you so much, and look forward to having you back. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, man, Larry, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, thank you too. Corey Clark, clearly a very busy man, driving back and forth from Atlanta to Tallahassee on a regular basis. Thank you to our title sponsor, Parham Smith and Archenhold Law Firm in downtown Greenville. Also in Clemson, within sight of the stadium, the Abernathy Boutique Hotel, and Tandem Payment in Greenville. Thanks to all of you out there for listening. 35,000 downloads in a little less than 2 months, so really appreciate that. Everybody have a wonderful weekend, and we will have the next podcast on Monday morning, so stay tuned. Cheers.